So, as I said, I'm looking at Divinity and Humanity by Oliver Crisp, and specifically that chapter on problems with perichoresis. In this chapter, Crisp articulates the difference between nature perichoresis regarding the incarnation and person perichoresis regarding the Trinity. In my study of the Trinity, then, person perichoresis is the relevant one for the moment. And basically, Crisp distinguishes between two definitions of person perichoresis. The first one being strong person perichoresis, which he defines as the persons of the Trinity interpenetrate one another such that all the properties of each person of the Trinity are shared together in the essence of the Godhead. He points out a number of problems in that if all of the properties of the persons of the Trinity are the same, then there are no differences between the persons of the Trinity. They're identical. There's no reason to think of the persons of the Trinity as distinct persons. If they all share the same properties, in virtue of the indiscernibility of identicals, they're all the same person. And so he says that that's not fine-grained enough to make sense of the distinctness of the persons in virtue of them having different properties. So the Son, it becomes incarnate, but the Father and the Spirit don't, etc. So what he does instead is define a weaker version of person perichoresis. He says this: the persons of the Trinity share all their properties in a common divine essence, apart from those properties that serve to individuate each person of the Trinity, or express a relation between only two persons of the Trinity. So he's saying that the persons of the Trinity share certain properties in common, except for those properties that individuate them, i.e. Being ungenerate, generate, spirated, incarnate, not incarnate, etc. So on that theory, he's trying to say that we have enough to say that they are interpenetrating each other in a significant way, but also distinct enough to warrant personhood. There is a difference in terms of their relations to the other, so that they can be counted as distinct persons. Let me just quote the last bit of his paper. He says, person perichoresis is different from nature perichoresis in this regard. In person perichoresis, the divine persons share most, but not all divine properties together in the divine essence. Thus, person perichoresis must be robust enough to express the strong sense of interpenetration required for the Trinity to make sense. But it must also be fine-grained enough to ensure that it doesn't obscure or deny the fact that there are properties that individuate the persons of the Trinity that are not shared together in this perichoresis. And I was thinking that you could take this kind of definition of perichoresis in a Latin Trinitarian way or a social Trinitarian way, because the social Trinitarian could affirm that each of the persons has a distinct consciousness, so that they're differentiated from the other two, but the rest of the things in the properties of the divine nature they share. So, I feel like social Trinitarians could agree with this version of perichoresis as well. Now, it's interesting to note that Crisp finishes by saying, none of this actually gives a complete explanation of what perichoresis is. What does it mean for a human nature of Christ to be penetrated by the omnipresence of the divine nature of Christ to a greater degree than the way in which the divine nature penetrates me? And what does it mean to say that the three persons of the Trinity interpenetrate one another in their shared life together, while remaining at one and the same time one God in three distinct persons? I cannot say, because I do not know. This is a divine mystery before which theology must give way to doxology. And so Crisp highlights certain things that we can say about perichoresis and certain things that we can't say. And I think it's notable that he kind of pauses and is cautious at the point where social Trinitarians like Moltmann seem to say, this is perichoresis, this is what it is, and this is what unites the persons of the Trinity. And I think perhaps that Moltmann oversteps the mark in terms of how he's using perichoresis. So, some interesting thoughts there, and rather helpful articulation of how we might understand different types of perichoresis. So thank you, Oliver Crisp, in his book Divinity and Humanity.